A package has just arrived for me from eBay, and it is something I have been really looking forward to getting for a couple of months now, and I finally picked one up. So let's break her open. It is a Bronica SQ-A. So I've now had the camera for about 1 month. I've put 5 rolls of film through it. I've put 3 rolls of black and white and 2 rolls of color slide film. And I can happily say that I am super happy with this camera. I've truly come to like it. I thought I'd like it before I bought it, but now that I've actually used it and handled it and went out and shot photos with it, I'm super happy. Like it is a true joy to use this camera. In some ways that are kind of surprising, and in some ways that aren't really surprising at all. Why did I pick the Bronica SQ-A over all of the other medium format cameras out there? Well, I had a few requirements when I was picking up or buying into a medium format system like this. The first was I wanted to be able to shoot 6x6, and that ruled out a lot of cameras just straight off the bat. The idea of shooting a square format would be kind of novel to me. I'd never shot square photos before, and the idea of trying to compose for square I thought might help me with my composition skills and learning photography, and I think it kind of has, maybe, sort of. I don't know, I haven't really used it enough to know. But that was one of the reasons I wanted a camera that could shoot square. I also wanted to buy a camera that was sort of a system or would allow for things like lens interchangeability, finders, and, well, now film backs. And that basically meant I was narrowing out or eliminating all TLRs outright, unless you get like one of the really high-end TLRs that allow for like lens swapping. But those lenses are super expensive, and I didn't really want a TLR anyway. So I knew I was buying a sort of film camera, modular camera system like this. Now there's a couple of square shooting ones of these. I think there's some Russian Kiev cameras. I'm not really sure, I didn't research them too much. There's obviously the Bronica series, which I ended up going with. And of course, there is the Hasselblad 500 series, which I didn't go for one very good reason. So the reason I picked up the Bronica SQ-A was it seemed to be the best value for money at the time. This was about a €450 purchase on eBay. I bought it from the UK. And for my €450, I got a Bronica SQ-A body, a waist level finder, a 80mm 2.8 lens, which is the equivalent of around a 45 to 50-ish kind of 1.4 on a standard full frame camera, and a 120 6x6 film back. The other reason I picked this camera up is because the lenses for this camera are relatively cheap. The lenses for something like the Hasselblad are actually really expensive. For this you can pick up the 150mm f4 or f3.5 for around 120 to 160 quid on eBay, which is the equivalent of an 85mm f2 portrait lens, somewhere around that area, which is a really nice focal length for shooting portraits with. And I can pick up wider lenses and longer lenses as needed, and they're relatively cheap compared to something like the Hasselblad system. Other accessories are pretty cheap as well. You can buy different film backs. I currently have the 6x6, but I can buy a 120 645 back if I want to try out shooting 645 film. But you can also pick up 135 backs, which take standard 35mm film cartridges, of which there is 2 types. You have the 135N type, which takes standard 35mm film and shoots a standard 35mm frame. So I believe it's the 24mm by 36mm frame. And you can also buy a W back, which is the panorama back, which will shoot a wider portion of the frame or expose more of the frame at once. And this shoots a 56mm by 24mm frame, so it gives you about a 2:1 image. And I would really be interested in shooting one of those backs. The only problem is they're currently on eBay for around €400, so nearly the cost of the camera alone. But it'd be really cool if you can frame it. You do need to buy also a different ground glass insert in here, and that will have the frame lines for 135 film. Or you could probably just get a piece of cardboard, cut out the 135 bit in the center and just drop it in and use that as a frame line, because why not? The last type of back available is what's called a Polaroid back, and it takes 4x5 peel apart instant film, but unfortunately that type of film is no longer manufactured. It just doesn't exist, and packs of it go for ridiculously obscene prices online now. So the Polaroid backs are basically useless. One thing about the Bronica that you will notice straight away is that you have to give up a lot of the conveniences of a lot of film cameras of that time. Even though this came out in the mid 1980s, it doesn't have any form of light meter or any kind of automation at all. Like, just absolutely none. It's completely manual, which means there's no aperture priority, there's no shutter priority, there's nothing. It's a fully manual camera. Now this means you do need to carry some kind of external light meter. Now, and generally you've got three choices for light meters. You've got buy a light meter. The second option is to use a camera with a light meter as a light meter. And for that, I've been using the Canon A1, which is my other film camera. It's 35mm film, and this has an inbuilt light meter. So I put in aperture priority mode, set the aperture whatever I want to take it at, look through the viewfinder, read the shutter speed that's needed, and then just put that on the shutter speed on the Bronica and then shoot the picture. But this is still a heavy, bulky thing to put in your bag when you want to go out shooting. So most of the time I just end up using my phone. So I have a light meter app on my phone that is really, really accurate, like surprisingly accurate. It's actually spot on. It also has a spot metering mode, so you can just spot meter using the phone camera, get your settings and take your picture. One thing that did surprise me about this camera is that it actually handles as a waist level camera really, really well, which you wouldn't think it, because it is just sort of a concrete block of a camera. But apart from the weight, which it is quite heavy, it's surprisingly ergonomic, which is a very strange thing to say about such a brick. So if you're shooting from the waist, if I stand up for this here. So when you're shooting from the waist like this, you obviously open up your finder and you look down through the finder and you get your rough composition. And then what I do is I pop open the magnifying glass here. There's a little magnifying glass hidden. And then I use that to get my focus absolutely perfect. And having the magnifying glass makes a huge, huge difference. Then I fold down the magnifying glass, get my final composition. I normally do this on a tripod. And then you shoot the picture, but you're kind of holding the camera like this. Okay, so you kind of put one hand underneath and the other hand underneath like that. And your shutter button is here on the front. So you've actually got quite a firm grip. I've actually shot quite a few pictures handheld and it's been just fine, so long as I keep the shutter speed high enough. But it's a surprisingly good camera. So we'll just pop it here. We're going to flick the lever here. This is the multi-exposure lever, by the way. I'll do a full video on how to work this camera completely. But the multi-exposure lever, you wind your film on, you look through, gain your focus, and then shoot the shot. Now this isn't actually shooting because I left the dark slide in. So I'm going to pull the dark slide out, pull it down. So here we go. Takes the picture, and then you just wind it on, and you take your next picture. And it's a multi-exposure, which allows you to dry fire the camera without any film inside. If I do this, it won't fire because there's no film at all. So it's surprisingly nice to use. It's very ergonomic, even though it's a bit of a brick. Carrying it around is a bit of a slog. So you do kind of end up carrying it like this. I have these little Peak Design toggles here. These keep the camera on a wrist strap, so if I drop it, it doesn't drop on the ground and kind of explode into 1,000 tiny pieces. But I end up carrying the camera kind of like this around if I'm walking around with it. But it isn't really a walkabout camera. You do want to be using this thing on a tripod if at all possible. But it's surprisingly ergonomic. It's actually quite nice. Okay, so here we have my pseudo light table. It's just an LED light with a diffuser over it. And this really does highlight how impressive medium format film is compared to 35mm. So these are some test pictures I shot on some Velvia 50, and the detail that you can pull out of these negatives is quite frankly amazing. Like, these slides are just, they are absolutely stunning. If you view these through like a loop, you can just pick out every detail of that swan's feathers like perfectly. Now, to contrast this, we have some 35mm slides, and this is a roll I developed myself. And these are of some deer, and these are pretty good. Like, these slides are fairly sharp, they're full of detail, you know, they're nice, the colors are good, but they just do not compare at all to the medium format film. Like, just look at the surface area difference even. Like, you're projecting the same image onto such a bigger piece of film. It's going to get so much more detail, and it's so crisp. Even black and white film like this here, which is the test roll I shot, is just like, it's a negative, but you can just, even that, you can see the detail in these street performers here, and you can just see all of the crispness in the pond and in the park here. Like, it's just staggering how much there is in this. Like, it's absolutely beautiful. If you want the highest quality negatives and archives, like, medium format just is so good at it. So good at this. Like, it's just staggering. Like, when I first saw these coming out of the tank, I was just blown away altogether. Like, it's just gorgeous imagery coming off. They just look so damn good. As for final thoughts on this camera, I'm totally going to keep this camera. I'll probably pick up a few accessories for it in the future. I'm looking at picking up the 150mm lens, maybe an extra film back, and down the road I'll probably pick up a 250mm lens, the equivalent of a 135, which I really like that focal length. I might pick up a prism, and there is actually a prism finder for this camera which will do metering for you in the prism, and that just clips on where the waist level finder goes. So you can clip a prism on here and hold the camera up to your eye. You can also get a handle, so a grip that goes on a base plate, and it puts a side handle on the camera with a shutter button, so you can kind of hold it up and use it almost like an SLR or standard 35mm SLR. But I really like using the waist level finder, so that won't be it for a while. But yeah, Bronica SQ-A, a truly magnificent camera. You're going to pay for one probably. You'll end up picking one up on eBay. They're pretty expensive, but they are totally worth the cost, and I'd highly recommend it. So that is it for this video, guys, and I'll see you next time.